talk for the Android track for today. Lastly, we have Rout. He's going to be talking about designing and building a real-world Android app with material tools and components. A brief bio: Nick is an Android engineer currently employed at Over, the easy app for creating. He's passionate about material design and human-computer interaction. He's the organizer for GDG Cape Town and frequently posts Android-related stories on Medium. He's featured on Android Experiments for his creative open-source apps that he works on in his spare time. Nick, welcome. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks all for attending today. Final session of the day, last push. We can all do it together. Cool. So as mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on material design tools and components and my experiences in using them to build a real-world Android app. So here I am. That's my name, Nick Rout. There's my handle that you can find on most social media, Rick Nout, Spoonerism. It's quite funny. So yeah, please give me a follow. Cool, let's dive right in. So it seems like it was a while ago now, even though it doesn't seem that long ago, but Google I/O 2018 introduced a heck of a lot of stuff to Android development. I think it really shook up what we think of how we develop Android apps, what libraries we use, how those are packaged, things like Jetpack, AndroidX, Constraint Layout 2.0, architecture components, app bundles. It was a jam-packed conference, and as a result, there's been a huge shift in almost like moving to these new standards as a result of that in the months after. One of the announcements that I felt was of equal importance, but flew slightly a little bit under the radar compared to all of these crazy things, was the fact that the material design team is now in charge of what we as Android developers previously knew as the design support library. So for those who don't know, this is the library that was part of the support library package, which shipped all of the material design widgets. So things like floating action buttons, text inputs that are styled correctly, etc., etc. So the big news here was that the material design team was taking that over and packaging those as part of a new material components for Android library. Cool. But that wasn't just it. There was a heck of a lot more that was announced under the material design umbrella. So first up, there was the material design website redesign. This is it here. It's basically now been fully reduced into almost like 3 main destinations. That's the design side of things, so the guidelines, the specs, and how things look in terms of material design. There's a development part of things, so this is where you can find access to the documentation and repositories that hold the components that you actually put into your Android app and other platforms too. And then there's tools, which is a lot of the new tools that I will go into later that the material design team has made to make going from designing an app to building and shipping an app a lot more seamless and more of a pleasure to do. Cool. So as I mentioned before, there has been quite a revamp of the material design guidelines, lots of new and updated things. Things like layout, navigation, typography, iconography, motion, things like that. It's extremely comprehensive. It was already, but a lot of things have been updated and added, and it's truly like a real flagpole, I'd say, in the UI design industry, in that it really goes into so much detail, and you don't have to ask too many questions when developing or designing your Android apps. So this has been vastly updated and is really cool. There's new tools. So I will again go into these later as well, but this includes things like the Material Theme Editor, which is a full Sketch plugin for designing Android screens and other platforms too in Sketch a whole lot easier. The Material Gallery, which is something that's similar to Zeppelin or Envision, if you've used that, for previewing and collaborating on designs. And then there's smaller web-based tools like the Color tool and the Material Icons tool. So last but not least, I'm flying through these initial few things here because we're going to dive into them with a bit more detail, but it's the Material Components Library. So this is the one that I mentioned first off. And it's the library in the purpose of my presentation for Android that holds all of these components that are part of the material design spec, and at least attempts to implement the guidelines and the specifications that they've laid out there. So just a final word on that. The whole goal here, I think, of the material design team is to put everything under one team and one umbrella, ultimately with, I think, the goal to have them designing the specifications, shipping the tools and the components, and ultimately making that like more consistent. I think as Android devs, perhaps there's been times when you see one thing in the material design guidelines, let's say how a floating action button behaves, but then you import the design support library and it does something different, and you think, where did the translation get lost here? But ideally, this is going to reduce that. Cool. So with all of that in mind, heck of a lot of new cool stuff, I thought to myself, right, so there's a lot of stuff here, some of which I want to use now, some of which I don't, but actually, what is it like with their vision to use all of these from start to finish to make a real Android app? And I hope all of you are wondering that as well. I definitely was. And so that's what I decided to do. So this is the app I made. It's called Rugby Ranker. So I think probably I'm one of the few people to sit in that Venn diagram of developer and person who watches rugby. I don't even know if that I might be the only one in the entire world. But anyway, so it's basically just an app that I made to allow you to view international rugby rankings, fixtures and results, predict what the outcomes of rankings will be based on these, etc., etc. But also it was my goal or my project to use all of the material design tools and components in. Cool. So there was that Venn diagram again. I probably shouldn't have added this slide, actually, come to think of it. But there's me, lonely in the middle. If you are one of these people, I promise we'll be friends forever, so just come find me after this. Cool. So I'm now going to take you through the various steps that I took in my attempts to use all of these tools. And what I'm also going to do for the first time, because I have given this presentation before, is that I'm actually going to include some live demos this time. So I'm a little bit nervous about that part, but please bear with me as I do that. Cool. So the first thing I had to do in my design process was to choose a color palette for my app. And what I went about doing was literally just going to the World Rugby website, using a color dropper, and extracting some of the key brand colors here to use in my app. So on the left-hand side, I've got my major colors. The blue and the green was the prominent ones. And then I've got some of these minor colors that I extracted, which could be used for errors, borders and dividers, backgrounds, etc. So I went and got these colors out. And then what I decided to use is the material design color tool. So here comes the first live demo. This is what it looks like, a static screenshot, but here is it in action. So this is a web, it's purely on the web, it's on the material design website. As you can see over here, I've put in my primary and secondary colors, the hex codes of which match the ones I showed you before. And what this gives you is a set of like preview abstract screenshots that you can use to see, is this really going to look any good anyway? And I was fairly happy with how this looked, so I was okay with that. But crucially, what it also gives you is things related to accessibility, like the color of your text that you need to display on these colors. So in both cases, it was white, because this provides the necessary contrast for, let's say, someone with low vision to see this text. You can actually go into the accessibility tab here, and it gives you a lot more detail about what's legible and what's not, the sizes, the colors, etc. It's pretty awesome. And then you can translate this into your Android app theme. Cool. So, as I said, I wanted to include this in my app development process. So the first thing I had to do here, and I wanted to make basically an Android theme that incorporated these colors, was to import this new library that I mentioned in the first place. Let's get that out the way. Then, for those of you who are Android developers, I went ahead and made a classic XML theme. Here's my Rugby Ranker theme. And the interesting part here is that its parent is the new theme.materialComponents theme. And also of interest here is the new attributes, the color primary variant, and color on primary. and the equivalents for the secondary color. So as Android developers, I think we're used to using an app compat XML theme, and also we're used to these sort of like three main attributes: the color primary dark, and color accent. So this is almost like the new way of doing that, and it translates to what those colors I showed you before, in that the color primary and color primary dark are those variants of your theme colors, and then the color on primary is the accessible color that they give you for things like text, icons, etc. So another little word on themes, and I've kind of spoiled it already by explaining this, but as Android developers, as I said, we are used to these sort of 6 app compat themes that shipped as part of the design support library. And these would be like theme.appcompat.light, .noActionBar. There were a few variants with a few key differences. These have all been almost like directly translated to the material components library with this new material components namespace. And if you do switch over to using these, what this will require is that any style or attribute that you have in the theme will propagate down to all of your like fragments, your activities, and any views you have in them, and they'll all be themed by this. It'll be quite like a dramatic change if you do switch across. So what they do offer is these .bridge themes. So in this case, it would be theme.materialcomponents.light, .noActionBar.bridge. And what this allows you to do is to opt in to these attributes one by one optionally so that you can slowly move your app across, especially if you have an existing app that is like quite complex with a big theme with lots of different widgets. Cool. So the next step in my process was to decide on typography. So what font did I want my app to use? I didn't want to just go with the standard Roboto font that Android Studio or Android projects give us. So I went ahead and had a look again at the World Rugby website. And it turns out that the font they were using was a proprietary font called FS Blake, and it costs about like thousands of dollars to use per month. And I was like, nope, I really want to do this, but I'm not paying that amount of money. The closest open alternative that I could find was this font. Didn't really like it, to be honest with you. And I needed something that was a little bit modern, no-nonsense, easy to read, something that felt sporty, maybe. And big surprise, the font that I used is this one. It is the font that I'm using in this presentation, and it's called Rajdhani. I just kind of went through the process of using this tool, Google Fonts, to find something that I felt fitted my needs. So while not strictly part of the material tools on the material design website, this is still a Google product. It allows you to search through like thousands of free-to-use fonts in your app. And it's an awesome tool. I actually have a live demo for it if you want to see. Yeah, I'll show it to you, because I do have it. Cool. So here it is. This is Google Fonts. It's also a web-based tool. You can search for lots of fonts sort of here. I just search for my own. And then what you can do is select the font and then export it in your various weights that you want to. It'll download the font files for you, and you can include them in your Android app. Cool. So, including them in your Android app. Actually, what you should be doing when including them in your Android app is using something on Android called downloadable fonts. Not sure how many of you have used that before. I'm not going to deep dive into that in this session in particular, but essentially what it is, an Android Studio offers you a wizard to set this up, but you define the fonts that you're going to use and a font provider, and it uses a shared pool of fonts on the device that multiple apps can use. So it saves space on the user's device, because actually font files take up quite a lot of space, especially if you're repeating them in multiple apps. And it's pretty easy to set up. But if you do want to use fonts manually, especially if you're using a proprietary font, you'll want to download those fonts, add them to your resources/font directory, and then XML fonts is really what you want to go for here. So this little snippet of code here shows how you can then reference those fonts in your resources, set up a little XML file, with the font family and the font variations. And then in your theme, the same theme that I showed you earlier with the colors, in order to actually theme your entire app with this font, it requires those two attributes. From what I understand as an Android developer, this wasn't always that easy, getting every widget in your app to be themed with a certain font. But as of now, it is pretty easy, and this seems to work. You'll notice that I use both the Android font family and font family because some of the widgets use the app compat variation of this and don't use the Android system variation. So this should be enough to theme almost every widget in your app. Cool. Typography done. The next thing I had to do was pick an iconography style. So in this case, I definitely decided to use the Material Icons tool. So this is another tool that is offered on the web by the material design team. Here it is. So it's an awesome resource. It's been around for a while, but it's actually been updated as of the Google I/O session. As you can see, it offers you like literally hundreds of system icons, and now as well, it offers it in various different styles. So prior to this material design refresh, we only had this filled style, but now they have outlined, rounded, two-tone, sharp. And if you select something, you can export it in the specifications that you want, download it as an SVG. It's pretty great. So in my app, I decided that the look of the outline style was more along the lines of what I wanted. So there were a couple of icons that I could get from this directly and just use. Otherwise, there were times when I needed my own icons, and so I made the bottom ones in Sketch and incorporated those into my app in the same way. So as I mentioned before, if you're going to be using these icons in your app, as an Android developer, you should absolutely be using them as vectors. So the Android Studio offers you a really cool wizard to use to import an SVG file as a vector drawable, which then gets put into your resources/drawable folder. And then what it means is that you have one asset that's defined as a vector, saves space on the user's device, can do a bunch of other cool stuff too. Won't go too deep into that. But that's how I got all my icons sorted and chose my style there. Rightio. So now that I'd kind of decided on the key attributes of how my app would be themed, that would be color, typography, and iconography style, I went ahead and decided to use the Sketch plugin, the Material Theme Editor, as it's called. So the first step here that I had to do is, well, have Sketch installed on my personal computer. So it's available. I think it's a once-off license of about $100 or $50 if you are a student. It's a really awesome tool for designing UIs. And then the material design team made a Sketch plugin called the Material Theme Editor that you download, double-click, whatever, done. Cool. So the first step in this process was to then go into Sketch, click on the Plugins tab at the top, choose the material one, and then open the theme editor. This brings up a little window inside Sketch where you can then take the attributes that I mentioned prior to this, that's color, typography, iconography, and another one called shape, choose your attributes, and it creates a whole Sketch library for you with components themed with these attributes that you can then literally drag and drop into Sketch files so that you can build screens super, super fast. So this is the initial setup process. You can see it here. This is what pops up. And what it basically asks you in the beginning is to define your colors, so firstly define your colors, define your typography. You can see all of the Google fonts included in there as well, which is great. It asks you to define what type of shape you want. So that'll be like the roundedness of the corners or the sharpness of the corners, or if you want a chamfered edge as well. And then also the iconography style too. So when you pick these 4 key attributes, which basically takes you like, I don't know, 1 minute, it then does its thing and builds you up this entire library that you can then access in the Sketch insert menu. So you can see here in my insert menu down there, I've created a theme using this Material Theme Editor. And whenever I make a new Sketch file and want to design some new screens, I can just go into all of these menus and pick out all of the material design components that I can just drop into Sketch. I have another demo of Sketch. Let's go all the way across. No. Okay, I think I actually... Oh, I do have it here. Cool. So here you go. Here are all of my Rugby Ranker screens. And here, as I mentioned earlier, are all of the components from the Material Design Theme Editor. I didn't create these. They just sort of appear when you make your theme. And then you can go ahead and drop like a confirmation dialog into your screen there. And it's styled correctly. It has your colors, it has your font, it has your shape. Pretty awesome. And what's more, you can see that these sort of standard components here are part of the material design library. So this is a floating action button. It has this icon. It has this color, etc., etc. Cool. Nope. So from there, once I'd made my screens in Sketch, the next thing I wanted to do was preview my designs that I'd made in this material gallery. So yes, I am a team of one person, but this would be very useful if I were a designer and I had some developers or whatever. Anyway, I went ahead and did it as well, just for the sake of this presentation, and to also keep track for myself of what I was designing. So from the material gallery, from Sketch and the material theme editor, you can upload these sketch files directly as images to the material gallery, and then they appear there on this web tool as your screens that you can preview, see, inspect for specifications, that kind of thing. I'll take you through it now with a bit of a demo. So let's actually just do that because that's a better way of doing this. So from Sketch, I've got all my screens here. And you're actually viewing a preview of the next version of Rugby Ranker that isn't available on the Play Store. So I'm going to go into the material plugins and the material theme editor, and I'm going to go upload to gallery. Oh no, oh shit, I don't have my internet connection set up. That's a bit of a problem. Okay, well, I can show this to you afterwards. But anyway, it's quite a simple step-through process where it just does its thing. And then you're set up on the material gallery, which is this. And because I don't have my internet connection set up, this is not going to work. So that's a bit of a bummer. Okay, I'll have to show you that afterwards, but I do have some screenshots in my presentation to show you. I told you this live demo wouldn't go too well. But so that's what it looks like on the web. It's gallery.io. It's a material tool. It basically shows you all of your screens there for you. You can then click into each individual screen, and you can inspect it to look at the which material design component you should be using in your Android app. You can look at the size and the margin and the padding and that sort of thing. And you can also comment on things so that if you do have a team, you can say, hey, I think this looks a bit off. Why don't we try this? Or this icon's not quite right, etc., etc. If you're used to things like Zeppelin or InVision, would be quite similar. It doesn't have all the powerful features like giving you XML that you can just drop straight into your app. Maybe that will come in future. But again, totally free and pretty cool that it integrates with the material theme editor and Sketch. Rightio. So the next step here was to build the app. And for this, I'm going to tell you to check out the code on GitHub. I've covered most of it actually already. I've set up my theme in my styles file. I've set up all my resources as icons. I've imported the material components library. And from there, it's a pretty standard process of building an Android app. And I don't really want to dig into the details of how I chose to architect it and build it and modularize it because it's a bit outside of the scope of this presentation. Nonetheless, let's have a little look at it then. So this is it here. This is probably the most interesting part and most part that's similar to, like, relevant to this presentation. So here's my theme file. I've got my colors set up as I've mentioned before. I've got a secondary theme. I've got a few widgets like a bottom navigation view, a toolbar, chips, those sorts of things. So yeah, I would really encourage you to go and look at the code on GitHub if you do want to check it out. It's fully open source. Fork it. Some issues, just generally look at it if you want to have a look. Yeah, cool. So the final step and the final thing I want to talk about, and it is part of the material design guidelines and what can I say, like specification, was deciding on an app icon. So might not seem like a big deal, but for me it was something that I really wanted to try and make good. So this was the app icon I ended up with. And as it turns out, it didn't just come out of nowhere. There is a material design specification for various parts of an app icon that are pretty interesting, at least to me, in terms of things like shadows, colors, shape, that kind of thing. So there was lots of thought that went into this, and all of this is documented on the material design guidelines in terms of the opacity of a shadow, the Y offset of a shadow, like what colors you should or can use and how you can create like a interesting visual effects on an app icon in terms of like something that's big on the Play Store and also something that's tiny on a small screen. So yeah, I went through some design processes and iterations, but it's all there for you to look at as well and really to like help you improve your own app icon or your company's app icon, that is. And keeping in line with the development theme, remember that as an Android developer, you shouldn't just be adding a straight-up PNG app icon. You should be adding an adaptive app icon. For those who don't know what this is how can I say, an app icon that can be masked to any shape on any kind of device. So let's say your Android phone's launcher says that all the app icons on the phone are squares, whereas on my Pixel phone, they're all circles. So an app icon is meant to sort of adapt to that, almost like OEM branding, but also offer a few like things like it can be quite like resized while offers cool little visual effects on the home screen. So setting up an adaptive icon for me was the usual process, which is having a foreground and a background. The foreground goes over the background, obviously, and those two resources were imported as vector drawables and then combined in this small little adaptive icon XML resource here that I've showed you. And that will go in a resource, a directory called resources/mipmap nedpi v26, which basically just says this resource is only applicable to Android Oreo, which is when adaptive icons were introduced, and that it isn't actually, it's density independent. It's made of vectors, so it doesn't have to be like HDPI, XX, HDPI, whatever. Cool. So I mentioned a lot of good things about this whole approach that the material design and I guess Android team has taken, but it wasn't, up until quite recently, I feel it wasn't all that good. Like the ideas were good, but then when it came to the implementation and almost like the setup of this team and how it integrated with the overall Android community, it wasn't that great. They moved their code to GitHub, where it's publicly available and still is. But there was like, as a result, they saw a ton of traffic of many issues and pull requests and that kind of thing, and they were left unaddressed for months. No one said anything. No one from the team responded, which is quite unheard of in the Android community, which we all know and love to be this place where like you can like reach out to a Googler or submit an issue on the Android bug tracker and gets instantly attended to almost and fixed. So this was not so great. I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that there were no members of this new material design team that integrated with that Android community that we know. There were some issues initially with the attributes that they offered, and sometimes it didn't even work. Like you could say the text color of this chip should be white. Didn't work. Don't know why. And there were lots of things outstanding. Like you couldn't define in your app's theme that all of the shapes in your app should have like chamfered corners or sharp corners. You just had to do it like per widget, which is kind of against the whole vibe. And then there was also these ongoing discussions of like, is this an extension of app compat? Is it its own thing? What is it? How do we use it? When should we use it? So now, at least I've noticed in the last month or so, since almost like the Android Dev Summit, they gave a presentation there. It introduced these two members of the community there, Cameron Ketchum and Gautam Sajith. I think they're both on Twitter, and they're both trying to be more active. They gave a great presentation on how to use material components at Android Dev Summit. It's on YouTube. Go and watch it. They're more active on Slack and social media now. The issues and PRs have mostly been addressed and are being actively worked on. And they're also going for quite a faster release cadence of this material components library. In that Dev Summit video, they promised once a month. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. And just in general, there appears to be more community involvement and adoption, and I think, yeah, there were some teething issues, but now it's okay. Rightio, so I'm almost ready to wrap up. If you would like to grab the app, or Rugby Ranker app on Google Play, it is there. The GitHub code, as I said, is fully open source, and I welcome you to go and download or have a look at both. And yeah, that is me. Again, please give me a follow. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I do have 2 books to give away, as per everyone else at this event. And I would also like to open up to some Q&A first. So not entirely sure if I should do books first, then Q&A, or Q&A, then books. I'm feeling books first, maybe. Yeah, okay, maybe get everyone a bit more excited. Cool, so Mac's about to run out of battery because I don't think this thing is working. Anyway, cool. So the first question for one of these books, Android Apprentice or Kotlin Apprentice, is what is the extension used on the material components themes for those that allow you to opt in to theme/style attributes? The first line I saw was definitely yours. Correct. Would you like Android Apprentice or Kotlin? Cool. There you go. Well done. The next question, what is the name of the font I used? Whoa, shit, okay. I'm pretty sure I saw that hand. What was it called? Nope. Okay. I saw that hand next. Yes? Correct. Well done. Cool, there you go. You got an Android Apprentice. Maybe I should have got a Font Apprentice book or whatever. Cool, so that's it from me. And if you do have any questions, fire away. And otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it. Yes.
I'm not an Android dev.
Okay.
I work more with web apps and all of that.
Okay.
I've been using Angular material design for the past year or so.
Yes.
And I see that you use Sketch.
Yes.
To sketch all your UI stuff. Is that purely just for Android apps, or can you use it for the web side of things as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question was, can you use Sketch? And I would imagine you want to know about the material, like a theme editor and all those other things for not just Android, but web and other platforms. And the answer is absolutely yes. Sketch is, I would say, just a general design tool, probably geared more towards UI design. Whatever platform it is, yeah, go ahead and use it. Same as the material theme editor. It's actually geared towards mobile and web. So you can then create your web sort of mock-ups in Sketch, upload those to Gallery, inspect those. And in addition to that, the material components libraries are not just for Android. They actually ship for iOS, Flutter, and web too. Whether those align with the iOS UI guidelines, I can't 100% say. Or sorry, I mean the web UI guidelines, or is there even web UI guidelines? But yeah, it's all available for web as well. Yo. I'm not entirely aware of something that's so specific to material design. Android Studio does offer some lint warnings, like especially if you, like I know of one where if you apply padding or margin to the one side of like a widget and you don't, like the start but not the end, it'll complain, and you have to either override that or like match the margin on both sides. With regards to complying to material design, don't think so. It would be really cool. Probably quite hard to do as well. But no, I don't think so. Yo.
Yeah, so this is more about like the rank up. That's about
Okay, yeah.
I'm just interested in how do you collect the stats so that you can now rank it? Do you remember it yourself, or is there a process in the background that does pulling on that data from somehow?
Okay, cool. So did everyone hear that? Cool. Yeah, so there's actually a World Rugby Open API for fetching things like rankings, fixtures, and results. My app uses Work Manager to periodically go and like it runs a 24-hour refresh service to go and like fetch the latest rankings and then populate them in a room database, and then that just surfaces from the UI, along with a user refresh that can also like just trigger it whenever the user wants to do that. Yeah, we can chat about that more in detail in person if you'd like. Yeah.
Might be slightly off topic. Wanting to know about
Honestly, I don't know. The most I can say is that, well, okay, I've never used Flutter. The most I know is that there was a lot of hype about it, at least at Google I/O. Whether that hype has followed through to industry adoption, or at least almost enthusiast adoption post that, it's difficult for me to say. If I'm honest, I think I've noticed a trend of like a bit of a decline lately, at least in like almost like social media presence and Flutter chatter online. But again, I don't know, and I'm not the source of truth for that. Cool. Looks like that's it. Well, thank you all for coming, and have a great after party.